Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Connor Robertson. I am one of the adult programming librarians here at the Leonardtown Library. We are doing our Herbs in Disguise program.
Welcome, everyone. I would like to share with you some of the discoveries I've made through the years, what I've discovered in my backyard, of all things. I was intrigued by all these plants that I was finding and not knowing what they were. So I said, well, people were telling me they're weeds. They're just weeds. And I said, yeah, but I think there's more to it. And so I'd like to share some of those discoveries that I made. Now, what is a weed? Well, we think it's something we don't want, that it's undesirable, that it's unattractive, and gives us trouble. Of course, whenever you've tried to pull weeds, they're very difficult to pull out. And so they're not wanted in a garden. But according to Ella Wilcox, a weed is but an unloved flower. Now, in the botanical world, the word weed does not exist. A weed is a plant out of place. So what is it? What is the weed? It's a plant whose virtues have not yet been discovered, according to Ralph Waldo Emerson. And he would know. He traveled a lot. And on his walks, I'm sure he saw plenty of weeds. And someone that we know who had written about who? Weeds are flowers too, once you get to know them. So let's get to know a few, but some of their characteristics. One, as we all know, they're tough. They have an ability to thrive almost anywhere. Look at the sidewalk. Look at the roads. Look at walls, brick walls, any kind of walls. You pull them out and what happens? Overnight, they seem to spring up. They're large populations, and sometimes they hang out with other weeds in a sort of a plan to survive and to thrive wherever they can. Some of them love cement. That's where they want to thrive. So even if you pull them out, you'll have a little bit left. Next thing you know, you've got 3 plants. They seem to have some sort of special resistance to chemicals. Spray them, pull them out, they're going to come back. But the problem is they can also affect the plants you want to stay in your yard, or the pretty plants as we call them. And so they crowd out these plants. But there's more to these weeds than we know. And you can already see, we're familiar with dandelions, but there are others. So, what good are they? Well, they repel pests, and they also destroy harmful bacteria. They get along with ants too, if you've noticed. They protect the ants from rain and other things. And if you notice, the soil, they add to the soil and they increase the moisture. You'll have a plot that looks like just dry, the section of the garden that's like dry and doesn't seem to have the look of soil. Well, after a few of these plants are there and you start pulling them out, you start seeing the soil changing, the consistency of it changing. They also are considered living mulch, and they shelter other plants as well. In some cases, they even provide food, not just for us, the humans, but for the insects and birds. And birds seem to have a knack for knowing which ones are the best and which ones might be poisonous.
Mm.
For some of our insects, and if you've noticed, the population of bees tends to be less than it used to be, and butterflies. And so, in some instances, these so-called weeds help provide the nourishment that these insects that are beneficial to us need. One of my favorite cartoons that I ran across. I can never tell the plants from the weeds. And definitely there are lookalikes if you've ever noticed that when you're looking at these and sorting through. And the neighbor replies, pull them all up, and the ones that grow again are the weeds. And as you know, here today, still here tomorrow. Once again, a weed is simply a plant that wants to grow where people want something else. In blaming nature, people mistake the culprit. Weeds are people's idea, not nature's. Crabgrass. It even sounds nasty. It looks like crab. They're everywhere. Have you ever tried to pull them out? What do you get? Just a few leaves in your hand. And you can't dig them up because they're usually coming out of the sidewalk. They're even in the roads. They're low growing, they sprawl everywhere. Sneaky, definitely. Territorial, they'll take over anything. They sprout quickly and they spread like lightning. But consider the dry weather we've had. There's your crabgrass. You've got something green on the ground and in your yard, and they definitely love the cracks in the sidewalk. And for one thing, if no one's filled up the cracks to fit, you've got the crabgrass. But be careful when you're pulling the crabgrass. There are usually ants underneath coming out. So even the broken sections of the stem will reroot. You pull it out, and next day, you've already got something growing again. But the seeds draw the sparrows, the finches, and others. So they do have some positive. Now, this is an interesting plant. It's pretty too when you think about it. And think about some of the so-called weeds, that they really are pretty, and some of the colors are quite
Mm.
bright and not dreary. So these little dark green leaves with red stems grow low to the ground in a mat-like fashion. And again, it's hard to pull out of the ground. They like cracks too, and they like wood. But you have to be careful about some of these because as you pull it out, there's some liquid that sometimes comes out. So I would advise definitely if you're dealing with this, if you don't have the proper tools to pull it out and it's hard, you almost have to do it by hand sometimes. Put on gloves. I had a neighbor watching me pull weeds and all, came over with 5 pair of plastic gloves. She said, I don't want you to hurt yourself. So it's nice to have neighbors who look out for you, but that was a good gift to use. Now these oval-shaped leaves grow outwards from the center, like a wagon wheel. They grow fast. I can vouch for that. If even a little shred is left in the ground or wherever you're pulling it out of, because sometimes it can be in the crack, or they'll even get into your flower pot.
Mm.
But that sap can irritate your skin. I've been quite lucky in not having that happen. But if you have any kind of allergies or issues with skin problems, definitely protect your hands.
Mm.
Heartweed is kind of pretty. And if you notice, the Greek name for it means many knees. And as you see, the blossom kind of small. That's another thing you notice with a lot of the so-called weeds. The flowers tend to be dainty in many instances. Bright maybe, but dainty in appearance. So in a way, it's an illusion that they might actually be a flower rather than a weed. They're trying to fool you, see. But they're usually pink. I tend to see more pink than white. And they have a peppery taste. I don't advise sampling weeds because you don't know what it could be. And sometimes they have like a purple bluish look to them. They thrive in sun or shade, wet or dry, and even water. So they're tough critters, as you can see. They'll grow anywhere. Um, in my backyard, they grow around where you have the the water runs over the sidewalk in the back, and so they get into those cracks near the garage door and near the any kind of puddle, and anywhere you have water outlets, the drains that come out. And right now I have a mini jungle in the backyard. Unlike many exotic weeds, they do support wildlife. And I have plenty of insect life, so to say, some pretty, like butterflies, and some not so pretty, like yellow jackets. So you have to be careful around some of these if you're trying to pull them, because it also attracts kinds of insects that can do damage to your plants or to you. And they're winter food for small animals and birds. They have a variety of names which reflect different cultures as well and locations. As you can see, these are apt descriptions of what they look like, not grass. Lover's pride, I don't know about that. Red shanks, false buckwheat. That's something you find again. A lot of these so-called weeds imitate acceptable plants. Devil's shoestring, I thought that was kind of interesting. And birdweed, which reflects definitely that it provides food for the birds as well as other animals, insects too, I'm sure. Goosegrass. I found this in my front yard when I was trying to trim the hedges, and it kept sticking to me, and I couldn't figure out what is this thing. And it was like it had little stickers and getting it off, but not, it wasn't strong enough to scratch my skin or to cut or anything like that. Very kind of sticky. So I finally figured out what it might be from reading books and going online, because there are more and more websites that actually tell you about weeds than used to be in years past. And once you get it on, you start pulling it off. It also sticks to cats that wander through the grass and dogs that might come by, and you have to pull it off them. They are creeping, and they're just multiplied. Last year, I think they multiplied about 5 times as much as the year before. This year, goosegrass was out there as soon as it warmed up, even before the snows left. And they'll get all over other plants, but they're not harmful to them. The little hooked hairs grow out of the stems and the leaves that are there. They call it goosegrass because geese like it. So if you got any geese, make sure they get their goosegrass because it is edible. Now, interesting things about some of these so-called weeds. They're related to other plants that we use every day, either for culinary uses or medicinal uses and so on. This one is related to coffee. Now, who would think that this would be related to coffee? You'd think of coffee beans and coffee trees and plants and the leaves being different, totally different. Kind of a pretty plant. It's very minute blossoms. Again, one of the things you notice about weeds, they're not what I would say gaudy flowers or really bright flowers. They tend to be kind of reserved in that sense. And the poultices have been used for skin ailments, light wounds, and burns. They have interesting names, nicknames. Robin run the hedge, gripgrass. Now that one makes sense, and sticky weed and catchweed, because it will hook onto your clothing, onto you, your shoes. Cleavers is another nickname for it. Morning glories, we're familiar with that. We like the morning glories, even though they do try to push out other plants. They're colorful. They like the sun, but they don't like the cold or dry air. What's interesting is the color, blue. There are quite a lot of blue colored weeds, so to say. I don't know why that pops up a lot. Weed, a light pink, white, yellow, I've seen. And again, something that common, another common characteristic about the flowers with the weeds I've noticed is that they open up in the dawn, then they close at night, and sometimes there are fresh blooms the next day. They don't always last for a length of time as so-called flowers do, although some flowers have the same characteristic. They're easy to control. You can pull them out real fast, but you can also train them to climb the string or on your fence. My neighbors and I have been pulling and yanking some of these for the last week or so. But again, something else to watch out. The seeds are toxic if they're ingested. And that's another characteristic of some of the weeds, that there is some toxicity involved, either in the seeds or sometimes even in the stems. You've seen these around. They kind of have this darker grayish green look, and they look like this has to be some kind of an interesting plant. You don't always think of it as a weed. We think of it as a weed now, because many of these plants have been brought over or somehow came to the States and may have started out officially as wanted plants, wanted flowers for some reason. And then they were abandoned to the wild, or they took over. Another nickname, it's called pigweed. You wonder why? Well, in some parts of Asia and Africa, they're used as a food crop. And that's where they originally came from. They are edible. I don't recommend it unless it's in the protected area because you don't know what has walked over it or watered it. So you have to be careful. Maybe if you have a protected area that isn't open to wandering creatures, but it is considered edible and gluten-free. That's another thing that I've noticed with some of these so-called weeds that have emigrated to the Americas, that their home of origin, they were actually used perhaps in a practical way, sometimes for food, sometimes for other uses. And it indicates that this one may have originated in the Americas, and I'm assuming that means North and South, but then went to other parts of the world, including Europe. So there was kind of a trade of various plants, and in their new surroundings, they may have altered their color a little bit. They adapted, but we see more and more of this as other plants were now considered invasive were brought over. You may have seen these, especially even though if you drive fast on the road, don't linger, but you may have seen on some of the side roads these considered weeds. It's considered a wild millet and needs lots and lots of space. But again, it provides seeds to birds and animals and decorative in the sense of being used in dried arrangements. That's another thing I have seen on some of these so-called weeds, that people have found other uses besides just food, but using them in this kind of manner. And these apparently adapt well. Foxtail grass. That's a very adaptive name, very appropriate. Spiny sow thistle. Now I wonder who would eat sow thistle. It's also called hare's thistle. So we know, and hare's lettuce. So we know animals ate this and probably still do without any adverse reaction. It's called a milk thistle and a milky tassel. That tells us that if you happen to pluck it, you're going to get stuff on your fingers, that sticky stuff. So you have to be careful about that and how you might react, especially if you have any kind of allergies. Apparently, the leaves and the stems emit a milky sap when cut, and it's edible. Unfortunately, for the plant, it's an annual. So after the seeds go into the wind and drop down and everything else like that, the plant dies. But they can grow quite tall. This is one of those that is spread by the wind and through birds. You'll find that a lot with birds eating these, that they help spread many of these plants. Now this one has the spiny leaves. They're not really that, what should I say, that strong. But if you have allergies and if you have rather thin skin, in the sense of sensitive skin, be careful how you handle these plants. They also are related to the dandelions and daisies. Looking at this, you don't think of daisies, but when you look at the flower on there, and then how it begins as a yellow, and as it gets older, turns into white, you can see the similarities with dandelions and their different stages. It was a popular anti-narcotic at one time to help break addiction in the days of opium dens. So once again, medicinal. There are many, many plants we have lost that knowledge through the decades, but we're learning again. The Asiatic dayflower is one that piqued my interest. I was taking the trash out in my backyard, and as I was walking by the garage and stepping down the steps to go into the alley, I saw these plants, these blue plants, blue flowers. I thought they were kind of pretty. I said, wonder what this is. This is very fascinating. What could it be? And once again, remember in the earlier slide, I mentioned the blue of the on the one. Here we have another blue. And those flowers are interesting in that they bloom for only one day. But in this hot weather, the leaves close up. And on a cloudy day, the flower closes. It doesn't come up. It stays closed. This is considered that it has a true blue. And many of the plants that are blue tend to be, what I've discovered in reading, tend to be what we call weeds. So a lot of flowers, in quotes, that have been created blue are not a natural blue on its own, the true blue. They were also used in traditional Chinese medicine and probably are still used. A creative aspect of usage is that the dye and the pigment from the flowers, and you can imagine how many they must have collected to provide this dye, was used in the Japanese woodcuts back in the 1800s, and perhaps still are. How they were able to use in this country what they came up with. They call it bioaccumulate. And it was used to regenerate or revegetate copper mines. I think it was originally that they came up with this idea in Tennessee, where they had mined it to bits. The whole, just acres and acres, had been depleted of any kind of floral or any kind of vegetation. And for some reason, these were able to replenish the soil so that it could be used again. What are perennials? Well, nice definition. Persistent, resistant, and defiant. Rachel Carson, I'm sure everyone's heard about her and her dedication to restoring clear water and vegetation and the natural plants and reviving soils. Our attitude towards plants is a singularly narrow one. If we see any immediate utility in a plant, we foster it. If for any reason we find its presence undesirable or merely a matter of indifference, we may condemn it to destruction forthwith. And unfortunately, maybe that's what we've done with these so-called weeds by calling them weeds. And yet they have usage, and we haven't learned how to use it yet to its benefit and our benefit. Dandelions, well, no dandelions. They're pretty. We play with them. You can remember when you were children, and maybe even as adults, you still do this. When they go into their last phase, we go out there, or as children, we did that, and we blow at it. But what we were doing was propagating dandelions. And our parents would probably say, don't do that, because we're tired of digging them out of the ground and getting them into, they were considered weeds. But not everybody thought of them as weeds. You fight dandelions all weekend, and late Monday afternoon, there they are, pert as all get out, in full and gorgeous bloom, pretty as can be, thriving as only dandelions can in the face of adversity. They've got all kinds of names in every language. Every language has some sort of name for it. They were also known as lion's tooth and monk's head. Still can't figure out why. Serves double duty as an herb and a weed. Interestingly, they're members of the daisy family. Who would think when you look at it and you look at the yellow and the kind of shape it's in and all, and then you look at the daisy with its petals, you wouldn't think they'd be related. The young leaves can be eaten raw in salads and also cooked as a vegetable. Country people often did that. Flowers used to make dandelion jelly and wine. We had a family friend who grew up in Maryland in a rural area on a farm. And she had a knack for making dandelion wine, which she shared with us once. And it can have a good punch if you really want it to. I haven't had the dandelion jelly, but I've heard it's pretty good. Now, in some areas and in some parts of history, coffee was considered a luxury, especially during World War II. And so they used the roots. They roasted and ground the roots as a coffee substitute. So remember next time that you blow on the puffballs that you're doing good and not spreading weeds. Clovers, there's so many clovers. And again, some people consider them weeds. They have pretty flowers. The colors, again, you note the muted aspect of these. By the way, the clovers are legumes. but the white clover is more invasive than the red, although the red tends to be bigger. I've noticed also with the white clovers, the shape is kind of interesting in that you have the puffy top and then like the little skirt below. And they tend to be shorter than the red or pinkish. Foraging animals, that refers to like cows, horses, sheep, rabbits, love clover. It can affect the taste of milk, though. That's according to my mother, who grew up on a farm and knew all about clover and some of these plants. Nectar-seeking insects love the blossoms. I can vouch for that. The bees have been busy this time of year. The red clover, interestingly, is the state flower of Vermont. You can have both clovers in the same yard. The pink ones tend to go up high, but then sort of they can be quite tall. They happen to thrive in my yard with the mint and some of the other plants. So with the taller plants, they tend to stay tall. In some other areas, they'll be low to the ground. Some birds like them too. You've seen these around, and I was curious again because it just looked like an interesting plant with the leaves that reminded me of the kind of cabbagey like or something along that line. And I said, I wonder what kind of plant this is because birds seem to like them. But I discovered there's more to this than an interesting shape and arrangement of the leaves and the spikes. It has astringent properties in the leaves. So you get a scrape or a little cut and you mash up the leaf, and you can use it also against poison ivy rash or a bee sting. So it has these astringent properties to draw out that itchiness and poison. It's used in children's games, and it's related to spinach, belongs in the spinach family. Each plant makes up to 15,000 seeds. So imagine if you've got just 5 in your yard. And as you notice in this image, it likes rocks, it likes rocky area, it likes bad dirt, so to say. Soil that is not, doesn't look like it's fertile, it doesn't look like it could produce something. So a lot of these plants, when they dry or wilt and everything, they start replenishing the soil. It's also been called chimney sweeps and rub grass. And I assume that the rub grass probably came from the fact that you could use it for minor cuts and scrapes. Buttercups. We all like buttercups. And you may even remember childhood game, or maybe you still do this, where you would put a buttercup under somebody's chin, and if it was reflected back to the underside of the chin, then you said they liked butter. We used to pick them and make a little bouquet to give to our mother because we might not have a lot of flowers, so we often picked a lot of interesting weeds. Hopefully, the person you give to is not allergic or to these plants. It's invasive, yes, and we see entire sides of lawn. They're hard to dig out, though. like the dandelion. Dandelion's even worse to try to dig out, and you get all that juice on your fingers and all. But these are at least pretty. And so you see lawns, you see them along the sides of the road, and they're cheerful. And butterflies like them. And with the problem of butterflies being less and less around, it's nice to have these to give them something to come to. This is known as sorrel. We sometimes think of them as being clovers because they've got these little clover leaves, which are kind of dainty, and they fold up. But again, we've got this dainty kind of flower blossom as well, yellow usually. It's called a yellow wood sorrel. I don't know if you're familiar with the herb that's sorrel. That tends to have a tangy taste, slightly acidic, but not enough to curl your tongue, just kind of whatever. And these have a flat, sharply sour taste when nibbled. I discovered that when my mother said, "Oh, yeah, let's wash it off and you can chew it." She used to chew it when she was a girl. Um, she didn't like sweets, but she, I don't know. Anyway, this does have a sour taste, but not to the point that you really cringe. It was called sour grass by some folks, but don't eat a lot of it because it can be toxic in larger amounts. So again, careful about these things. Plus, you have to be careful these days because people spray stuff on weeds. And even in handling plants, you don't know what has been carried over from a nearby lawn or yard. They're tenacious, that's for sure, and they adapt, just like some of the other plants. They're in that cement crack, the gravel areas, paving places. They'll even, the wind brings them into flower pots. They never know what's going to pop up. You may have seen these. They're kind of white gray look to them, called lamb quarters. And there's like a powdery look to the underside sometimes that can get on your hands. And so again, it's a good idea to wear some sort of protection. They have these diamond-shaped leaves, and birds love them, the seeds. The leaves, as you see here, they seem to be more in the shade that I've noticed, at least around my area. They are edible, and I know some people who consider it quite tasty. It's referred to as white spinach. It's got all kinds of good stuff like beta carotene, iron, calcium, and potassium. And when you look at the nicknames for it, pigweed, goosefoot, you got the baconweed. You can see how that's reflected in its usage. But apparently, this is a plant that is in other parts of the world, including India and in the Asian world. And it's also known as an edible and has a variety of names and meanings. This one can be confused with other plants, and that's why you have to be careful in some instances, because they resemble another plant that may be poisonous, so you have to be careful. It belongs to the carrot family, and you think about what a carrot looks like and what this looks like. It's native to Eurasia, and it likes shady places. Ornamental, but it's considered invasive. Some of these plants that were brought over that are now invasive were often brought over as decorative plants. And they found the soil good and the atmosphere and environment, and they just thrived. And unfortunately, some have become problem plants. They're good for ground cover, but it expands rapidly. So be careful about letting it get out of hand. They like to hang around fences, as you can see. Has a variety of names: snow on the mountain, bishop's weed, ground ash, again reflecting the color to some degree. And you see the look-alike, Queen Anne's lace. Some of you may remember growing up and seeing fields of this. And again, this one's related to carrots. It's got those lacy white flowers. Butterflies like them. Bees, wasps, and moths. And they bloom quite well. Birds like the seeds. They put them in arrangements. What we used to do as kids, we would get the dye that you use for Easter eggs, and you would dip these flowers into that. In some cases, I'm not sure if it worked with that, but we would dip them in there to dye them, and then you would get ribbon or something, and you'll tie it up and give it to your mom as a bouquet. You'd find some other things. I'm not sure that if you pick the flower and plant and put it into water, if the dye would go up into the plant. But I know the other way worked. Purslane. This is another edible, and originally native to India and Persia. It multiplies. Unfortunately, frost kills it. But this kind of weather that we've had, the drought time, the lack of heavy rains and so on, they love it. They're edible. They stick to the ground. They have those nice, tiny little yellow flowers, lots of weeds, and they'll grow everywhere. They love concrete, brick, you name it. They root easily because if you pull it out, even a tiny bit, or even a leaf, if they fall on the bare ground, on the soil anywhere, into a flower pot, next thing you know, you got a plant. And as you see, it's interesting scientific name, portulaca. I don't know how it relates to portulacas, but portulaca plants, the flowers, but it kind of has a similar floral part. Pokeweed. Danger, danger on this one. Definitely. Folks in the South are very familiar with pokeweed, so they know what to do with it. It's called inkberry, poke, and skoke. It's huge. Personal experience. Somehow the bird brought the seed to my yard, and this thing grew, and it grew, and it got to be like 6 feet in my front yard, and I've got like a 3-by-6 yard. And it's not took over. The problem with this is that the berries can be poisonous. If you don't know what you're doing, don't pick it. It also is a dye, and it's difficult. Its plant is, the berries are toxic. They're poisonous. Lots of it, they break easily. Don't touch it. It's hard to get rid of the root, but at a certain stage, birds and others like the deer reflected here love the berries. I know they also make pies out of this, but again, unless you know what you're doing and when to pick it, don't deal with it. I still have the root of that plant deep in my yard, and it comes out, and I keep cutting it back and cutting it back to, but I cannot dig the root out. So there it is underground. So once you see this, if the plant shows up, pull it out as soon as possible. Get it out and get rid of it because it will take over above ground, beneath ground. Beware the pokeweed. Johnson grass. I'm not as familiar with this, but this was one of those that was brought from overseas. Originally, it's from the Mediterranean region. And I think that the idea was that it would be beneficial to the growth of forage and to stop soil erosion and so on. It came around 1830, so relatively early on in this country history. And it was named after the plantation owner, Colonel William Johnson. It's also called Cuba grass, Egyptian millet, maiden cane, Syrian grass. So again, reflecting the area it came from to a certain degree. So it made it, when they call it Cuba grass, it probably was brought to Cuba and then someone brought it from there or some aspect of it. It's poisonous to livestock if they graze it when there's a drought conditions or the first frost due to its prussic acid content. So again, leave it alone. Some of the Kiowa children on the plains used the stem and leaves to make whistle. So it must have been quite a sturdy plant to a degree. And it was used to stop soil erosion. So it must have had deep roots in that respect. This was the discovery in a neighbor's yard. Actually, it was at a bus stop. And while I was waiting for the bus, I saw this plant, which delicate pinkish red blossom. It looks like a marshmallow leaf or mallow type leaf. And so I said, let me see if I can figure out what it's doing. And it is low to the ground. It likes to hang around fences. It likes sun. And it can be an annual or biannual, depending where you live. Well, with us living in Baltimore and this area around here, it becomes a biannual. And it tends to have more foliage than flowers. That's true, because the flowers tend to be hidden under the leaves as well. They like stone walls. They love cities. They're out in suburbia, I think. They're taking over there. And sometimes they've been called cheese flower, but they're pretty little flowers, delicate. And they don't look like a, quote, weed. It looks like some kind of a plant that doesn't look raggedy or can hurt you. Bindweed, they're hard to get out of the fences. I'm still fighting with one for several years, and every time I go there, I get it out there, and then next year it comes out again. They come out in full bloom by morning. They wither by midday, and then the next day they come out again. They're weeds that are pretty. And so if you don't mind them being in the fence, and maybe you don't like looking at your neighbor, leave it in your fence. The seeds can remain viable up to 50 years. So quite tenacious. And that concludes what a diversity of creative wanderers, weeds. I enjoy their beauty and variety and do nothing to reap their rewards. I neither hoe, nor plant, nor water, nor fertilize, nor prune. They come and go in lovely profusion as the seasons move. Often a pleasure, sometimes a pain in the wrong place, and always an example of the wondrous assertion of being. And you see the nice variety here. Ladybugs like them. Again, you see the delicate colors, the violet, the blue, the yellow. And see, they're not gaudy, but they still add variety and color to our lives and try to help us out in ways we don't even know. Thank you for listening.
Well, that is excellent. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I do have one note from someone, Kitty and Jim. They said that they read the other name for dandelions, lion's tooth, is due to the long tooth leaves that the plant has. So not necessarily the flower part there. If anyone has any further questions, please put them in the chat. I actually had one for you, Ms. Slezak. Where do you recommend learning more about the medicinal and edible uses of the plant? You mentioned that a couple of them in here have like edible properties or medicinal properties, and you said there's more websites. Do you have any like books or websites that you would
Well,
recommend people to uh, pursue after this class?
I have 3 books that I happen to pull.
Mm-hmm.
There's more and more coming out. We have quite a number. Every time I see one, I explore. There is a lot online too, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of interest. Um, I don't have any websites I can mention, but look through that. I found in our business science and technology department wide range of books. There's fairly recent 2021 book
Mm-hmm.
that only deals with 50 plants, but that's a lot. And it's called Weeds, The Beauty and Uses of 50 Vagabond Plants. And it's by a man named Gareth Richards.
Okay.
It's a nice little book. I don't know if I can kind of show you the cover. So you see it's right there. It's a small book, but it's handy. And they gathered together 50 untamed and beautifully wild plant species illustrated with exquisite botanical images. So I said, this looks like fun. And
Excellent.
sure enough, the illustrations, they're just, and it turned to the dandelion. Right away, it talked about dandelion, lion's teeth, pea the bed, and clocks. Names I haven't found before. It tells you the type of weed it is, the family, its
Mm.
uses, and if it's poisonous. And has several pages just on that and beautiful illustrations. The only thing and I don't want to call it a negative, the print's kind of small, but get a magnifying glass. That's all I say. It is a joy to look through it. It's refreshing. You can do one a day. You find things like the horsetail,
Mm.
nosetail, scouring rush is another name for another one. The illustrations are beautiful.
Excellent. I posted that in the chat there, and it looks like someone said that they didn't know morning glories were weeds. I didn't either, so thank you for that information. I thought that
See,
was
I
just
don't
a
say we.
native flower here. And then someone else said that they've used white clover to help with a cough. They tincture them in vodka for 4 weeks and then are ready to use. So that is interesting. I have used clover, white clover, as a substitute for flour in baking. That's what I was going to say about clover. So lots of uses for these plants.
Yeah,
Let's see, what else do we have here? Someone says, thank you for that talk. What is a good native plant for a culinary herb garden? Do you have any information or suggestions on that?
for an herb garden.
Yeah,
Um, I grew up with chives
chives. Okay.
for, and what I suggested to, um, first of all, I think the plant I have now, I've had for over 5 years or
Wow.
more. I've had one as long as 10 years.
Wow. Someone else says, thank you for naming the grass I fight with every day, crabgrass. So, yes, big shout out there. Um, as for the culinary herb garden, some stuff that I don't know if you, hopefully you can hear me. Some other herbs for the native plant herb garden, you can use spring onions or like field garlic. That's really good. It comes in the early spring and then it comes back again, I believe, in the fall. Very strong over there. Also, chickweed is another one.
Heard that, yes.
Yeah, that's one that I've used. You can make like a pesto with it. Um, and the plantain as well. That one's a good one as well. It helps with mosquito bites too. So, we do have some books. I'm looking at our catalog right now. We do have some books on foraging in the like mid-Atlantic region. So if anyone is interested in that, be sure to check out the library. Um, does anyone
I
else have any other questions?
I have another book that I would,
Oh, yes, absolutely.
this is a bigger one.
Okay.
Love it. That helped me identify a lot. It came out, it's a Reader's Digest book called Weeds, Friend or Foe by Sally Roth, Roth. It's an illustrated guide to identifying, taming, and using weeds. Excellent information in here to give you a profile of the plant. Lots of lovely, beautiful pictures. It's got the fact file, the way it's arranged, gives you the life cycle, the site, SITE, soil and season, dispersal, ultimate
Mm,
height, other names, just plant, just, it has a wild directory, weed directory,
excellent.
and weeds for craft,
Mm,
preparing
okay.
a remedy. So this one I definitely recommend. If you buy it, don't share with anyone else. Don't let it out of your sight, in other words.
Excellent.
Another smaller book, DK, published something that I'm exploring. 2024. See, very popular books, and they're coming out in these kind of handy sizes. What's that weed? Know your weeds and learn to live with them. It's by a person named Guy Barter, Barter. And again, wonderful things in here. Smart weed, the one I talked about earlier. Um, and you see that it's this handy size of the book too. So you can find, again, what I find that detracts, it's got small print, but But if you're dealing with plants, make sure you have a magnifying glass because you're going to be looking at that plant that's out there anyway. And it has a good selection. So these are really just the tip of the iceberg that we have.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for donating your time for this talk. I think um, I know I had a great time listening to all the new plants to go out and find. I hope you all did too. But again, thank you so much for everyone who joined us, and thank you again for the presentation.